The Winawer variation of the French defense begins like this. After knight to c3 to defend e4, black can play bishop to b4 to pin the knight and renew the threat on the e4 pawn. And that's the Winawer variation. White can advance the pawn, gaining space, taking away the f6 square from the knight. Black can follow up by attacking the base of the pawn chain. Okay, and then white can put the question to the bishop. It normally will trade itself off, and we get this imbalanced position where white's pawn structure on the queen side has been compromised, but black will be sorely missing his dark squared bishop. White can attack on the king side. The dark squares will be weak, particularly the g7 square is a problem right now. The move queen to g4 is normally played at some point to attack it. In the last video, we looked at the move queen to a5, but the mainline move in this position is knight to e7. And the purpose of that is to address the weakness on g7 right away. It prepares castling. The knight can go either to g6 or f5. Now after knight e7, the main line continues queen to g4, attacking the g7 pawn, and that's called the poisoned pawn variation, and we'll take a look at that in our next Winawer video. But first I want to look at some sidelines. If you want to avoid the main theory with queen to g4 and avoid some wild positions, then I recommend trying the move a4. And the purpose is to develop your dark squared bishop to this active post on a3. It's a much better diagonal for it. Okay, and after a4, black can try queen to a5, pressuring c3, threatening to take it and fork the king and the rook. So the pawn on c3 needs protection. You can protect it with your bishop, giving up your idea of posting that to the active a3 square. After that, black can just continue to develop. And now don't be tempted to play c4 and attack that queen, because the queen will just fall back to c7 and white's center will just collapse. Notice the pawn on d4 is under attack twice. It has no defenders. There's also pressure on e5. So don't push that c pawn forward. It's needed on c3 to support the base of the pawn chain. Instead, white can play knight f3 to further support the center. Then bishop to d7 to develop, and now you can develop your light square bishop either to e2 or b5 and continue from there. But backing up, if you do want this bishop to end up on a3, then you can protect c3 with queen to d2. Okay, after queen to d2, black can try knight b c6, which is a threat to win a pawn. Black is threatening to exchange pawns on d4 and then take off the queens and then take the pawn on d4 with the knight. So white is forced to play knight to f3 in that position. Okay, after knight f3, black can continue to develop with bishop to d7. And now if you want to, there are several moves here, but if you want to, you can finally play bishop to a3 and get that bishop active. If you do that, many games have continued with black simplifying the position and trading queens. C takes d4, c takes d4, the queens come off the board. White's forced to recapture with the king because he needs protection of the d4 pawn. And then black can play knight to f5 and attack that d4 pawn for a second time, c3 to support it. And then a good move here seems to be knight to a5, threatening to jump in and fork the king and the rook, or it can go to c4 as well. The bishop has been opened up. The c-file can be utilized by rook, and we can pressure the c3 square. So even though white has the bishop pair, and black's bishop is still somewhat bad because of his center pawns, black is doing fine in this position. Okay, so backing all the way up to the position here after knight to e7, we looked at the move a4, but another possibility is the move knight to f3. Okay. And knight to f3 sometimes is met by the move bishop to d7. And the point of that move is to threaten to come to a4 and blockade that a pawn so black can't get his bishop to a3. And the bishop would also pressure the c2 pawn. So because of that, white likes to push that pawn to a4 to stop that bishop from getting there and open up that square for the bishop. But now it will typically transpose back into the lines we just looked at. For example, queen to a5, attacking c3 again, maybe bishop to d2 to protect it, knight b c6, and then this bishop can come out somewhere. In this position we saw earlier where white played a4 first and knight g to f3 later. All right, as I said, these are sidelines. After knight e7, the main move is actually queen to g4, and we'll take a look at that in the next video. Thanks for watching this one.